We are here today on the Female Body Politics to talk with Annalise Riles about what's going on in Venezuela, what we can do about it, and why this moment is so critical. And Annalise, when we were chatting just before, and am I saying your name correctly? I like
Yeah,
to know.
you are, and I'm just delighted to be here. Hi.
Hi. I'm so glad to have you on here. When the news was announced, what was it, on January 3rd, that Maduro had been extracted from Venezuela and that we had basically toppled their government. You were the only person that I wanted to talk to. Seriously, I was like, I think I emailed you the next day because I just really needed to talk to you. So I'm so glad that we're able to.
We're going to get to the bottom of this. Yes.
Yeah. So when we were just talking before we went live, you said you've never experienced a moment like this before, that this really felt like Germany 1939 to you. Why? Why is this such a pivotal moment in your opinion?
Well, the U.S. has unprovoked invaded a foreign country, killing, as of this morning, the death toll over 100 people, innocent bystanders, kidnapping the leader of the country, bringing him back to the U.S. in a sort of kangaroo court style to stand up for trial. We'll see what the U.S. courts do with this. And just openly saying that this is the first domino and others are coming, right? So openly talking about we need Greenland next, Colombia, if you don't toe the line, you're going to be next. This is exactly what international law was created to address this kind of crisis. And he's told us he won't stop here. He's told us, right? So we believe him at this point.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we don't really talk about the Monroe Doctrine anymore. I mean, I'm sure you do as international lawyer, but for us, it's like, oh, this is something I learned about in high school. It doesn't really have a lot of relevance. And now we're just seeing it on ketamine and cocaine as per the drugs of choice of that particular movement. So what's going on? Why are they doing what? Why? What is the reason that they're giving, and what is the reason that you think is actually propelling this?
I think this is a really good question, and I don't think anyone has a good answer for what the reason is. I mean, drugs, it's not drugs because cocaine is not the drug of choice. That's not the issue.
Right.
Fentanyl in this country, right? Um, Oil, I was just reading a report from a bunch of the oil execs saying if he had contacted us, we would have told him we weren't interested in this. So it's not really clear what that's about. In any case, the U.S. has plenty of oil, so it's not that we're, short on energy resources. I think we've just got a guy who is very unpopular in his country and who reads Mein Kampf. That's a known fact. And who sees, step one, totalitarianism at home, step two, invasion abroad as the sort of playbook. And that's what we're dealing with. And let me just say, I mean, I'm so happy we're having this conversation, Lorissa, and I just admire what you're doing so much to bring a clear feminist perspective to what's going on in the U.S., because this is absolutely a women's issue and a feminist issue. It is, just look at who is in the room, who's making the decisions. There's one woman, Pam Bondi, who's there just to sort of, bring the guy into court, but it's all a bunch of boys making this policy, and not just the ones we see, but I'm talking to people, my friends, women, career women, state, CIA, Department of Defense. They're all leaving. Either they're being pushed out in this macho culture of you're a woman, therefore you're not a fighter, or they're feeling the moral pull and just saying, for whatever reason, I feel it more than the guys do, I'm not going to do this. So women are not in the leadership role. And compare this to Venezuela, ironically, where they've got a female Nobel Peace Prize as their opposition candidate versus a female president at the moment. It's sort of interesting. Mm-hmm. That's step one. Two, this is a pocketbook issue. I mean, do you really believe that this isn't going to cost the American public anything and that the oil companies are going to pay for the whole thing? Women in this country are concerned about their pocketbooks, and this is, going to affect our budgets. Now, three, this is going to be, it's our sons and daughters who are going to come home in body bags. I'm sorry, but boots on the ground equals body bags. That's what it is. That's why people don't like it. And women have always been a voice against that sort of, issue because we understand what that really means. And finally, I want to say this is something you've talked about, on and over and over again over the past 6 months, so with such clarity. Um, Gender is part of how we got here. I was in a taxi on the way to this conference that I'm at right now, and I got picked up by this kind of beefy guy. He was a guy's guy. He was like saying all these kind of guyish things, and somehow he started talking about this situation in Venezuela, and he was appalled and horrified, just so disgusted with what was going on, and angry at Trump and saying it all didn't make any sense. And then I said to him, "Well, it's interesting. I mean, you must talk to a lot of people. I mean, some people seem to be supporting it. Why do you think so?" And he paused and he said, "A lot of my friends say," I think that's always code for what I used to say, right? "A lot of my friends say they voted for Trump because they just couldn't see a woman president."
Yes.
And now he said, "I just want to say to you, I want to apologize to you and every woman in this country, because if we had Kamala right now, we wouldn't be in this situation."
This would not be even on the table. This would be on no one's radar. This would not be a conversation in any room, anywhere, at any time if she were president. And I think everyone knows that. And, I I'm not saying it's a bright side of things, but Trump and the Trump regime are really illustrating why toxic masculinity and the patriarchy are bad for everyone. I
Yep.
mean, and we look at it's so one of the things that's really interesting to me is how dearly this regime holds on to the old ways, whether that's patriarchy or even though Venezuela isn't necessarily about oil, right? Oil is really the past of energy production as we move forward into the green technology future. But in order to claim power, in order to hold on to power, they have to reinstitute these old ways that were sort of the petrochemical, petrodollar,
Yeah. Yeah.
patriarchal
Yeah.
forms of governing. And that's just not where the world, I think, is going. And they are very clearly illustrating how and why that's bad, not just for women, but for everyone. Um, I want to get into this later, but I am very very interested in how certain suffragists did a great job of talking about why women's rights are men's rights. But I want to go back to your point about pocketbooks and budgets, right? Because we're seeing the economy, despite their attempts to obfuscate the truth, we're seeing the economy slide further and further down the hill, perhaps towards a cliff. And you said that this is going to affect our pocketbooks. How do you see this affecting, the increasing inflation, increasing prices, and potentially increased taxes on the American middle class?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, it costs a lot of money to do what they're doing, right? Look at what it costs the American people to run Afghanistan for 10 years. It's going to cost us. And that money is real dollars and it has to come from somewhere. And so either they're going to increase our taxes or they're going to cut our social services. Those are the only possibilities. Number two, when there's a war in any part of the world, a big war like this, prices go up on everything because shipping doesn't work the way it used to. Resources are scarce. This is going to upset the oil markets. So there will be lots and lots of consequences to this financially. On this one, I'm with Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, she said a couple days ago on into USA Today, she said, "This is the same Washington playbook that we are so sick and tired of that doesn't serve the American people, that actually serves the big corporations, the banks, and the oil executives." Mike.
I mean, it's wow. Okay, MTG. Did you ever think pre 2025 that you would say I'm with Marjorie Taylor Greene? No, you did not. But yeah, that's the thing. I'm really curious to see how MAGA, No Foreign Wars, America First, is going to react to this because, it
Well,
does.
it's the women in MAGA. Let's look at this carefully.
Yeah.
You know, not Speaker Johnson. It's not the guys. And this is again where I'm not saying all women are wonderful, but there's I think an openness with her, at least to rethinking the issues, and and so I think that makes a difference that she's a woman.
I do. I think, I posted recently, all I want for Christmas is a female president, a female majority, and 9 female uh, uh, judges on the Supreme Court. And I got so much pushback saying, just because they're women, I don't want MAGA women, yada, yada, yada. I'm like, yeah, okay, guys, but lived experience matters. Whether you were born biological woman or you've transitioned to being a woman, to know what it is to be a woman is to have a greater sense of empathy and a knowledge of what it is to live in a world that is more difficult simply because you are a certain gender. And that's true if you are a Black person or a Latino person. Lived experience matters, especially when it comes to governing. And I think it's very interesting that, Nancy Mace, MTG, and several other women in the MAGA movement are starting to push back against this very hawkish turn of events in the in this political movement that they were promised was about peace, right? And how interesting that they
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
all this so belligerent, these people, this
Yeah.
guy who said, I could walk on Fifth Avenue and shoot anyone in the head and I would still be elected. He's supposed to be the president of peace. I do not think so. Um, but you mentioned that we're going to have boots on the ground in Venezuela. Like, pardon my ignorance, but what do you see? What are your colleagues talking about as deployment options? Are we really talking about a mass invasion? We are talking about running the country. What does that mean? How many Americans do you think are going to be committed to this irresponsible, illegal, and outright crazy war?
Who the heck knows, Larissa? I mean, I heard that our president told the New York Times last night that, quote, the U.S. is going to be involved in this for many years to come.
Oh, great. Are you kidding me?
It's
Sorry.
getting
Everybody have like my green drink. It's 8:30. So I'm like diving
but
deep into my policy.
I think, it's funny. I talked to my friends who are leaving national security jobs and so on. And, they talk a lot. We used to make fun of them for talking about, quote, hearts and minds, changing the hearts and minds of people in Afghanistan or whatever. But the idea there was that these folks have learned from experience that you can't control a population, no matter how much military force you have with sheer force. It doesn't work. It's just ultimately you can scare people for a while, but if they hate you, eventually the cost is going to be so high in lives, in money, et cetera, that it won't work. The only way to do it rationally is for people to want to do whatever it is. And that's where the hearts and minds things come in.
Well,
We're definitely not getting the hearts and minds of people in Venezuela. Let's get with it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to jump in real quick because that's an important point when it comes to gender. Because when I've been talking with my security personnel friends, they're like, women were doing some of the most important work, specifically in Afghanistan, when it came to winning over hearts and minds for a number of different reasons. One showed that, women could be empowered, women can be educated, women can carry a gun, women can be safe in their own skin. And two, there was actually, I was talking to a woman, Catherine Armandi, who was in Afghanistan for 2 tours. And she was saying that in Afghani male culture, failure is really seen as a problem. In our culture, we see failure as an opportunity for learning. In the tech industry, there's this famous saying that no one's going to ever really invest in your company before you ruin 2 of them. So failure is seen as a form of success. That's not true in Afghani culture, Afghani male culture. And so they were very hesitant, right? These military militia members that they were training, very hesitant to admit their failures to American men. But when it was women leading, they were more willing to say, this happened. I didn't do this correctly. Something went wrong. And then you could course correct. And that was way more effective to have women.
Well, I mean, totally shows,
Yeah.
and Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. She had a whole division at state that focused on gender in international law, gender foreign policy, and a ton of research was done. And it shows absolutely without a doubt empirically that around the world, when women are involved in peacekeeping efforts, there are better results. It's just a fact. And there are many reasons for that. One is, I think, as mothers, women everywhere share that one fact of being mothers, and mothers don't want to see their kids die. That's one thing.
Right.
But also just having a diversity of viewpoints, as you say, in different social positions, diversity of perspectives provides opportunity for new solutions.
Mm.
And these guys have booted all the women out of the leadership roles. And so what do we get? We get insanity.
Insanity, and the same old insanity that got us
Yeah.
into World War One, quite frankly. But I want to talk where you are because you're at an international
Yeah, it's an
law
annual meeting
conference.
that
Where
will happen of national law professors. So we're all debating this, and I mean, I think there's no doubt that, there's simply no argument that this is acceptable or legal under international law. Under international law, the UN Charter makes clear that there's only two valid reasons for military action. One is in absolute self-defense, and the other is pursuant to a decision of the Security Council, which was the case in the Iraq wars. The U.S. got the approval of the Security Council, but it's not the case here. So there's no question about that. The Secretary General has said so. We were denounced in the UN Security Council this week. Embarrassing, embarrassing, embarrassing by our allies, a whole group of course, Latin American countries. And lots of other reasons under international law why this is illegal. Also, one is we've clearly stated that we wouldn't kidnap foreign leaders anymore. That's not something we do. And once you say that, you're bound to it under international law. Um, I wanted to talk with you because international law is really weak right now. It almost doesn't matter that much, unfortunately, if might makes right. And I've been thinking that it's really the history that you have been working on, that shows us that women's activism is what really makes a difference here. So maybe could you take people through a little bit? You did this amazing post. I just loved it this week about the Women's League for Peace and Freedom, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which is an organization which is still active. And a lot of the women leaders in lots of international movements come out of that. So what do they do? And what example does it provide?
Yeah, so thanks so much. And so the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom has been around since, I believe, 1915. It was founded by Jean Addams. And Jeanette Rankin, my girl, was also a co-founder. She was one of the original founders there. And they actually met in 1915, soon after the declaration of the Great War in Europe, to try and come up with ways to form uh, different ideas of diplomacy and could mitigate the war as it was ongoing. They were not listened to, obviously, and the war went on, and eventually, America threw its hat in the ring. We can go into why they did that and the reasons that that the Wilson administration felt that it had to. Spoiler alert, it had nothing to do with democracy. But after the war, WILPF, which is sort of the most awkward thing to say, but what's shorter than Women's International Peace and Freedom, who I love. They reconvened in 1919 in Zurich to create an alternative to the Treaty of Versailles. Not only was the Treaty of Versailles did it end up being problematic, the wheels came off before they were even done because Germany left the negotiating table. And I forget if Germany or Japan were first, but basically the Central Powers left. And the idea of a treaty, right, is to negotiate with both parties to have an equitable peace. And that's not what happened. It was just the Allied powers basically negotiating a retribution, which is what was signed and visited on Germany and Japan. And people at the time understood that this would create the conditions for another global war. And no one understood that more than the women of Wilf. And so they got together to create a document that could serve as an alternative. And one of the things, they listed many different ways to avert another global war, which we now understand to be not pie in the sky, but pillars of international diplomacy. They advocated for, the colonialist powers to give their colonies self determination. They advocated for universal enfranchisement of women, but they also wrote in there that there could be no more backroom diplomacy, that everything had to be out in the open, right? And so, why is this important? Well, we see the secret pact between Hitler and Stalin, which laid the groundwork for the remilitarization of the Rhineland. And then we have, negotiations between Hitler and England that continued to allow Hitler to claim and solidify power in Germany. And it is really a transformative document, so much so, and forgive me my lecture, uh, but so much so that Jane Addams gave it to Woodrow Wilson, who then took 9 of their points and incorporated them into his 14-point plan. Right. So when we think about Woodrow Wilson as the father of international diplomacy, right? Because for those of you who don't out there who aren't super steeped in this history, Woodrow Wilson's 14 points plan became the basis of the League of Nations, which became the basis of the UN. And there's this myth that this was all sort of Woodrow Wilson's brainchild, while after he's had a stroke and can barely function. And it's actually Jane Addams and the women that she led in Zurich, who are the mothers of what we now consider to be international diplomacy. And had he adopted all 14 of his points and maybe had, 18 or 19, we certainly wouldn't be in the place that we are now. And so that's what I write about, that even though our history as women peacemakers has been erased and obfuscated and twisted, it is actually women. And I want to talk about the modern period, right? We are the mothers, women are the mothers, the creators of the modern peace movement. And it's
Yes,
from their thinking that all of these ideas that we are currently discussing and trying to implement originated.
absolutely. It's so true and so well said. And it's so important that you're writing about this and that we're talking about this, because I think even women aren't aware that they have been the leaders. If you look at the only time in which we've had a massive reduction in nuclear arms, 1982, as a result of huge demonstrations in the United States. 2 million people in Central Park. Think about that. 2 million people in Central Park demanding a reduction of nuclear weapons. And Ronald Reagan had to listen, and we got the biggest cut we've ever had. That movement was completely led by women's organizations. And when they started, all the guys said, this is stupid, it's crazy, it'll never make a difference, you'll never get anywhere. Now they all say, we did it. They've forgotten. They've forgotten that they weren't even at the table until the very end, when they insisted on being the ones speaking at the public events, right?
Yeah.
But this is true throughout history. I mean, you've written about Native American women leaders, and we can talk about, in Latin America, the Madres de Plaza de Mayo in Argentina, who were really the force that stopped the dictatorship there. Just so many cases going all the way back to women in Athens and Sparta who worked together to stop wars. So I think this is so important. We have done it before and we can do it again. And
Yeah.
I think that's what we need to think about.
I absolutely agree. And I just want to go back to your mention of the mothers in Argentina. This was under Pinochet. And I think about them a lot. I really, they're a great source of strength and inspiration for me. So a lot of young people were protesting the regime there and were arrested and disappeared and suffered terrible torture and unspeakable things. I would not like to encourage this, but I have to. I really, people are always like, Trump is the new Hitler. I really think Trump is the new Pinochet. I
Mm,
think that's the closest analogy
mm.
that I can come up with. But it was the mothers who came out into the streets demanding that they have their children back, who were the ones to change. And I also want to say, speaking of Jeanette Rankin, and I've been thinking a lot about this since we were emailing. In 1968, Jeanette Rankin. Okay, so Jeanette Rankin was America's first woman elected to Congress. She was elected in 1916. She was also an advocate for peace. She voted against World War One. She spent the entirety of the interwar period lobbying for disarmament and peace. And then she voted against World War. She voted against entry to war with Japan. So she was an sort of unwavering advocate for peace.
And wait, can we just stop and say how courageous that position must have been back then? I mean, it's like bucking everyone in the world, right? I
And-
mean,
yeah, and people are often like, how could she do that? And it's because what's erased from our historical understanding of World War II was it didn't just happen. It wasn't like Hitler bad, Japan
yeah,
bad,
right.
World War II happened. No, it was a series of escalations that could have been stopped
Yep,
along the way, a multiple,
yep,
and that's just the historical truth. And Jeanette
yep,
saw it at every
yep,
step. And
yep,
so got to the end, got to that moment of its crisis. She said, I'm going to hang a lantern on a path that could have been.
yeah.
And she really lit herself on fire to hang that lantern, to keep that light, because she was completely ostracized. But
Wow.
I want to move forward to 1968 when she sort of rediscovered as peace advocate during the Vietnam War. And she, along with many others, launched what was called the Jeanette Rankin Brigade. And her idea was that if 10,000 women were willing to be arrested,
Yep.
that the
Wow.
Vietnam War would end.
Wow.
And I can't stop thinking about this
Yep. Yep.
because I
Yep.
really and really called for a women's peace movement. And I need to have that commitment. I think we need to get a
Yep.
place where 10,000 of us are willing to go to DC
Yeah.
and be arrested. And
Absolutely.
I'm there. Like
I
I'm
totally agree with you because you know, it is, look, it's not a fuzzy wuzzy, kind of soft, touchy feely thing. It's
yeah.
in each of our self interests because, hey, the world has nuclear weapons, guys. Like, I think Americans think, well, we're sort of isolated. There's a sea on both sides. Nobody can get to us. But the fact is, in an era of nuclear weapons, that's no longer true anymore. And so, it is in all of our interests to do everything that we can right now to make sure that, as you said, the steps don't just keep escalating so that we don't get to an even more dangerous place. And, I was recently at the UN, I think I told you, and I was just so honored to get to hear Iceland's second female president, Hannah Tomasdóttir, speak. Amazing woman. And she told a story of a strike that women, a 1-day strike that women put on when she was 8 years old. And women across the entire country stopped all work. I mean, they stopped housework, they stopped cooking, they stopped driving buses, they stopped teaching, they stopped everything for 1 day to
Yeah.
show the world their power and to insist on peace and justice. And she says that's really everything changed at that point. And she said, that's what we need to do now for peace. And I think that if we organized a 1-day strike of women worldwide, these guys would take notice.
Yeah, because it would grind. I mean,
Yeah.
women's labor is made invisible to
Yep.
men, also to ourselves, right?
Sure.
Like take our labor as par for the course, but it's not. It's labor, and it's invaluable labor. And without it, the world literally stops. Particularly capitalism relies on the free and underpaid labor of women. And so I absolutely agree that, I don't know, maybe it's you, maybe it's you. But someone needs to stand up and start organizing this because, all all of is accelerating at an incredible speed. And what's very, I don't know, surprising yet predictable to me is that, right, we had Project 2025 and that hit the ground running. And then, those policies are very unpopular. Trump's unpopular. He's underwater. The midterms are looking like a very hopeful. One guy died, one GOP congressman died recently. Another one's in the hospital. Their majority is down to two. Republicans are defecting all over the place because everyone hates them now because the ACA credits are expiring. So what's the solution? Hit the gas. Don't
Absolutely.
correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's where we are.
And it's not more complicated than that. But
Yeah.
we need to make people see that this matters in their life,
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, I think so. What do you think? What do you think? You're such a good strategist, Lorissa. I mean, what does it take to get this done? How do we start today?
I mean, I think uh, I, usually I say, oh, it's just about interpersonal connectivity. It's about small conversations. And it is. But also, I think we need someone like Kamala Harris, Letitia James, Hillary Clinton, a high profile figure to leave politics
Mhm.
behind and commit themselves to a higher calling of peace. And
Mm.
again, like, women are so often derided and dismissed as touchy feely for saying peace. Peace is not easy. Peace is not simple. Peace is a full time, like,
It's active. It's not just
out, knockdown battle. And
absolutely. Absolutely.
I,
Absolutely.
well, look at nonviolence is not without violence.
Absolutely.
Nonviolence met with violence. Look at Alice Paul and the suffragists. Look at Mahatma Gandhi and Nehru. They all suffered violence. I mean, it is a very uh, uh, um, difficult thing
And
to.
it's also not without, I mean, we will disagree. We have different positions. People, it's about managing your disagreements. It's not about having no disagreements. So,
Right.
that's also yeah, but you're right. I mean, I think when people hear peace, they think, oh, that's not as important as the economy or other things. They don't quite see that these things are all wrapped up with together.
And if you don't have peace, you don't have anything. You don't have anything else. And I don't want to keep returning to it, but I do just want to talk about, right? Like, we are going to start to see boots on the ground in
Yes.
Venezuela.
Yes.
I think that's really going to start affecting people when their sons and daughters have to go to a country that never did anything to us, that we have no business being in, and that's not only going to cost us money, but cost us lives. And
Right.
all the while, we can't even pay for healthcare anymore. And
That's right.
not only, right, I want to go back to this idea of someone, a high profile figure needs to organize this. And maybe I'm wrong. And please let us know in the comments if you think I'm wrong. I would kind of like to be wrong on this point. But, you know, we, more than any other time since, I would say, 1970, we have an opportunity to make peace popular. But
Yes.
it's done before the war, the global war escalates.
You're absolutely right. Which is like, we're talking about this week, guys. Like, yeah, we're not talking about like this year. We're talking about right now. And I think the other thing is, it needs to be both a very U.S. focused issue because our president is the aggressor, but also it has to be about global solidarity. I mean, one of the things I hear all the time when I talk to people at any other part of the world, which I'm doing all the time, is just absolute bewilderment, befuddlement, confusion. I mean, nobody agrees with us on this. Nobody. We've lost everybody. And I mean, people in the financial markets in Japan. I mean, just like anyone you can imagine, right, left, and center.
Yeah.
And so I think the other thing that feminism brings is this idea of solidarity. I love, I don't know if you know Christine Ahn. She and I did a live together a while ago, but she's got this movement called Women Cross DMZ, and she had all these amazing,
Oh
Lorissa
yeah.
Rinehart and all these high profile women march across the DMZ. And the point of it was to say, as women, we don't care about all this fights between these leaders. You are women who are starving, and we care about you, and we can work this out. And I think that's another thing is, can we connect with women on the other side of this conflict and sort of elevate their stories too, you know?
Ab- Absolutely. And I just want to point out two things. One of my favorite speeches was given by Frances Harper, who was a Black suffragist in 1866 at the first suffragist conference after the Civil War in New York City. And the title of her speech is "We Are All Bound Up Together." And it's about why solidarity between all women and all people is important to accomplishing our common goals, which seems quite obvious. And yet it is a radical idea and one that we need to embrace. And secondly, I want to go back to what you were saying about how women don't care about, are more interested in each other's well being than in what the leaders are doing in boardrooms. My first book was about Dickie Chappelle, who was a combat photographer. But one of the things that she interestingly did was document post World War II rebuilding efforts, pre Marshall Plan in Europe. And this was a brutal time. I mean, people think, oh, World War II ended, the Marshall Plan happened, everything was fine. No, there were 2 years where people were just living in bomb shelters and houses riddled with bullets and bombed out apartment buildings. And it was the women who were keeping everyone alive. And that makes them more than the politicians, more than the international leaders. They were the peacemakers.
Yeah,
Without them and their work, war, I mean, intestine, nonstop civil wars would have broken out all over Europe and engulfed the globe once again in short order. Without them, we would never have gotten out of the cycle of war to the degree that we have. Um, and I would just say that I think in terms of making women's history visible, it's important to do that to understand the power that we have now, right? Because when we understand that we are the ones who are actually the architects of society, as Harriet Beecher Stowe tells us, then we understand moving forward, we don't have to just react to what is being done. We can be proactive in shaping how the future looks. And that's what you're talking about with this international peace movement. And so I just want to conclude with one thing, Annalise. And you said, what can we do now? And I said, we need a high profile leader. But I want to caveat that because I think on this platform, I've been really shocked to see how much of what we're talking about here, which is very, I would say, more progressive than common discourse, is
mhm.
becoming part of the political dialogue.
Absolutely.
Don't you?
Absolutely. I mean, look at the taxi driver that I was telling you about, and we need 2 million people like 1982 Central Park. We need 2 million people in Washington. And as you said, 10,000 to get arrested. And if we get that, it's going to be a different story. So I think, it's time for us to really put our energy into this. It's one of those strange situations where we don't have the luxury of days, weeks, months. It's got to happen right now. And for example, what I'm taking from this conversation, I think more than anything, every time I talk to you, I learn so many things. But this idea that World War II didn't all happen all at once, it happened in steps.
Mhm.
At each step, there was a path not taken. To me, that is, oh my goodness, that is such a lesson for us right now, right? To think about. If that's real,
Yeah.
and think of how, if we had taken a different path, how, what a different world this would be in many ways, right? How many people wouldn't have died? How many people would not have?
Good. I hate to say it, but we wouldn't have the Holocaust. We wouldn't have had Nagasaki. We wouldn't have Hiroshima. None of this had to be, and I need to plug my own book, but actually I'm going to plug it because it's very, I
Yeah,
can't read. It's not about my book. It's about Jeanette Rankin. If you want to know the steps leading up to World War II, please read my book, Winning the
yeah,
Earthquake. I,
absolutely. Yes,
I,
yes, yeah.
just break it out from Jeanette's work. And it has to be, right? This history has to be what's taught in schools. It can't just be this war is organic, war is natural, war just happens. No, people don't make war, governments do. And we need to start understanding that when we're talking about how to affect change. But Annalise, we only have 5 minutes left. This has been such a wonderful conversation. But you are the everyday ambassador. I'm going to throw this question back to you. What can the people listening do right now, today, to affect peace and to create change?
Okay, so the first thing is, subscribe to our newsletters, because you and I, we're not doing this for any reason except to build community and get a movement started. That's what we're trying to do here, right? And the wonderful thing about this platform and this technology is that we can do something different, I think, in this space together. So let's start there. Second, give us your comments and thoughts. If you're willing to think about, some more specific kind of organizing, this is the space that we could begin to think about that. Third, educate yourself. I'm going to be running a seminar this summer. There are lots of other opportunities out there. Learn as much as you can. It's people make you feel like all this stuff, oh, national security, it's technical, it's abstract. You have to know all this stuff. No, you don't. If I could do it, you could do it. I promise you.
Tell very families who said, I've been in the room with the smartest people in the world. They're not that smart.
Exactly. So let's continue, you and I, Lorissa, and all of us together. Thank you all so much for taking time to be part of this. Lorissa, thank you for hosting. This is just the beginning. So let's go.
All right, well, thank you so much, Annalise, for being here. And I'm really looking forward to talking with you here and just offline. I just am so
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.